every time I speak with Deborah, I find out something new about her. So Deborah is not only a licensed professional counselor and a certified positive discipline lead trainer, she was also a former co-chair of the board with Positive Discipline Association. And what I learned from her in our chat is that she was a full-time classroom teacher or educator, and she's also an energy worker. She's a non-denominational licensed minister. And what I learned this morning, and this is not it, but it's one of the series of the positive discipline in the classroom books, which is the next thing that I'm going to embark on. And Deborah co-authored a teacher's A to Z guide. She's an absolutely fascinating human being and educator and global citizen. And if you resonate with Deborah's message, I'm going to also add the link below. What Deborah shared with me is that she will be facilitating a training for teachers. If you are a teacher, or maybe you know someone to forward this to, who's interested in bringing more joy to your classroom, there will be a training starting in December. And also there will be the link below for the Positive Discipline Association, where you can see this training being listed very shortly. So I hope you enjoy this. I have the absolute privilege learning from Deborah on a weekly basis through her mentoring with fellow educators and teachers. And I am going to share with you questions I had to Deborah on the concept of holism, which means we see the child as a whole and not just the bad behavior, and on the topic of private logic or private intelligence. And what that means is how we as parents and educators have our own beliefs about ourselves, about others, and the world. And when we become aware of these beliefs, how it can help us in raising these children. So thank you for watching, and enjoy this part 2. So I would love to maybe explore, because this is quite new to me, even though I've probably read a few things about it, but Alfred Adler's concept of holism, if you could speak a little bit more about this and how you normally would share that with parents and what he meant for it.
Well, just to give an overview, and this is not what I would tell parents, but I just, for anyone listening who might want to go deeper with this, Adler was quite the observer of the human condition. And because of that, he was able to transcend cultures, even though he hadn't experienced all cultures or all religions, but he was able to look at the human condition and pull out truths that we now, even science has proven to be true. In a time in the early 1900s, medicine, for example, was all about separateness, based on a philosopher called Descartes. Now, those of us who have studied indigenous tribes and traditions know that our indigenous brothers and sisters have focused on holism, okay? Meaning that everything is connected. Okay, but at the time in Europe, in the West, there was quite an emphasis on everything was separate. So at that time, Freud was developing his psychology. So he had the id, the ego, and the superego. Everything was separate. Okay, and he did not show how they all interconnected. In medicine, if there was something wrong with the heart, you only focused on the heart. You didn't look at the whole. What kind of diet do you have? Are you getting enough exercise? We're doing that today, but back in the early 1900s, that was not looked at. It was just focusing on the organ that was causing problems. Okay. Adler's vision, as he began to observe and expand, he coined the term, or he gathered the term holism from a man named Jan Smuts, who was in South Africa at that time.
Okay.
And Jan Smuts, I think, was the president or whoever the head, I forget what they called the head body in South Africa at that point. But he was the first one to use that term, at least in the West, called holism. Adler said, yes, this is where I am seeing everything as being part of a whole. Yes, there are all these separate parts, but they all work together. They're all connected, and one does not operate without the other. So you can't just say, well, this is this, and that's it. They all interrelate, interconnect. Okay, so he began to see even the universe and the cosmos as part of the whole, and that individuals were part of the whole, and then that they were a whole universe within themselves. For example, even in different languages, we pretty much agree that even if we say it's different words, this is an arm, right? Okay, but is this all I am? Am I only my arm?
No, you're not.
Okay. And can my arm operate without the rest of me?
No.
No, if somebody chopped my arm off, it might wiggle a little bit and then it would not work anymore, right?
Yeah.
So we are all, our bodies are connected. So if you can see this, but also what else am I without am I only my arm? Am I only my head? Am I only my heart? What else am I? And so when I start this with parents, I'll say, what is it? Are you only this? What about your leg? All right. Do they work together? All right. What about your circulatory system and your nervous system? Are you only your nervous system?
No.
Yes or no?
No.
It all works together. So what happens in the circulatory system impacts the nervous system. We know with the brain model,
yes,
that it is all comes together and all works together. And if we get stuck here, then we turn to flip and we have no access to this, but it is still part of our whole. We just need to learn how to get back to here.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah.
All right.
So you're just for the parent watching this, and I might link it below, you're referring to Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain.
Correct. I'm referring to Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. But again, there's so much more, because now we know that the heart, the physical heart, actually has more nerves going from the heart to the brain, and has an impact depending on the way the heart beats, can help with doing this. In other words, calming ourselves so that we can use our prefrontal cortex and our cortex, our thinking part, or whether we stay flipped. Okay, we now know how important the nervous system is, not just the brain, but the entire nervous system, and how the heart's beat, whether regular or jagged, okay, impacts that and helps either calm trauma or keep you in trauma, keep you in those uncomfortable feelings. Everybody has uncomfortable feelings. You're not going to get away from uncomfortable feelings, but you're not designed physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually to stay stuck in them. So when I'm working with parents on this, okay, I usually use the physical body, get them to laugh. And then I'm saying, so when you're working with your children, what is the one part of your child that you usually focus on?
The behavior.
Exactly. And so I'll say, and is their behavior all of who they are?
No, they're not.
No, but what is the reason that we as parents or teachers focus on the behavior?
For me, it has to do with my agenda, right? whether I need others to approve of my children, or maybe my own childhood stuff coming up I don't want to
Exactly.
feel.
This behavior makes me feel comfortable. Oh, look at them. Oh, everybody's seeing my child and they're doing such a good job. Okay. Or, oh my God, I can't wait to get my kid out of this grocery store because he's screaming. What must all those people looking at me think? Okay. So at that point, we are not seeing the whole child.
Mhm.
And we are limiting ourselves to that specific behavior, and we're basing it often on how we are so connected and so attached and take things so personally
Right.
by their behavior. Oh, look at them. Oh, everybody's going to think I'm such a good parent, kind of thing. Or, oh my God, what are they thinking? My child's, having a meltdown, kind of thing. And so we're taking things personally, their behavior personally, and we have stopped seeing the whole of who they are.
Wow, thank you,
We
Deb.
are
That makes so much sense now. It makes so much sense. Now I get
we're
it.
extremely disrespectful by not seeing the whole, to realizing this is a blip
Mhm.
of the whole of who they are.
Wow.
Okay. So that's kind of where, I ask parents questions
Yes.
to get them to reflect, because we've all done it. I know I have. And
Yeah.
I haven't talked to parents. I have talked to parents all over the world, but I haven't talked to every parent. But the parents that I have spoken with have all gone through this kind of experience, that we tend to we label the child in usually using their behavior. I've seen parents also label, again, this goes against holism. We label traits. Well, my child is stubborn, for example, or my child always wants to be right. Or we label, oh, my child is so pretty. Okay. Or we label, oh, they're so smart. And my other son is so slow, or whatever, So we use labels because they, first of all, create an illusion that we can make sense of our world and that we can make sense of the child. Most human beings are not comfortable with mystery. Many of us don't like to be detectives. Okay, some of us do. Okay, but you need to be comfortable with having a mystery, that your child will be revealing themselves to you. And if you're willing to take a deep breath and step back and do your best to see the wholeness of your child, okay, and realize that it isn't just about seeing the physical, but it's also listening for those cues of what they believe, what they think, how they see the world. And that means, and one of our positive discipline tools, as you know, is curiosity. And curiosity, to be really sincerely curious. And to be curious means you can't label something.
No.
You just can't, because again, it's like your child said to you, who makes these decisions? Who decides this? Oh my God, that is such wisdom. That's such wisdom. And, we as human beings tend to like things in boxes because it makes us have the illusion of safety, of something we can explain. Well, a lot of people on the planet do not like to be in a situation where they can't explain it. even though we're talking about Adler and, of course, positive discipline, I want to highlight something that really stood out to me. I was in my 50s when I first came across it. And again, Adler would be the first person who was always looking and studying other famous thinkers down through time, looking for truth. What he did was then take these truths and put it into a psychology. But he never said, oh my God, this is my truth. Never once did he do that. It was just that he took these truths that he observed, and then all philosophers that he read also observed, and then put it into a psychology to help people move beyond their narrow way of seeing the world to an expansive way of seeing the world, to be always curious, to believe that there is always more to this mystery that I haven't seen. And that frees you up from the fear of everything needs to be in a box in order for me to feel safe.
Yeah, and so I can control it, right? And
so I can control it. Exactly. So Rainier Maria Rilke, who it took me a long time to realize was a man and not a woman.
Yes, because of the German tradition of taking the mother's name. Yeah.
Exactly. It took me so long to figure this out. In his letters to a young poet, one of the things he said, be comfortable with the questions. Be comfortable with the questions. Keep asking the questions, because then one day you may live into the answer.
Wow, I love that.
I was in my 50s when I first heard that, and I thought, oh my God, because I wasn't feeling comfortable with the question. I was in a very deep, dark, what some people call a dark night of the soul, and everything that I thought was certain was gone. And I was in darkness, and I was like, oh my God, just live with this darkness, live with these questions without knowing the answer. To be comfortable with that. It took me a while to get there, but that statement really helped me.
Wow, that is really powerful.
But that's the same with our children, because we don't know who they're going to be. And that can be scary.
Yeah, very scary.
Yeah, because we're afraid that what if they take a wrong turn? Or what if they fall with the wrong crowd? So I remember we catastrophize the future, and we miss the present moment of connection in relationship with them. And that, as you know, in positive discipline, of course, Adler's with the holism is about that deep connection in relationships, human relationships, but also a deep connection with your own body. And then a deep connection with the cosmos, the earth, the air, the water, the animals, the trees, the plants. Adler knew in his vision, and that's why holism is such a key element of Adler's psychology. It is in the center, and then all the other parts of his psychology come out of that center and act together. But they're all attached to the belief of the holism, because if you aren't looking at the holism, then you are missing something if you're only focusing on one of the parts, such as we were talking about the behavior. Does that make some sense?
It makes, I had so many insights when you were speaking, and I also realize why I've always been so attracted to it. I've always wanted to go to the root cause, and the Western medical system, which I hope is changing, to only look at the symptoms, never really satisfied me. So that he was there, and just for the parent who used this and has never maybe heard about Alfred Adler, Let me get out one of his books here. This is what he looked like. So he was born in 1870. Was it? Correct me if
I
I'm
think
wrong. But
1870. Yes, yes, yes.
yeah,
So you did get Phyllis Bottom's book?
I did after you had recommended, but unfortunately I couldn't get it in the English language. It's called Apostle for Freedom. If anybody's interested, I could not find it, so I got it from Germany, which is
And
called.
in other publications, which it's out of print now, so you have to find somebody or a library. I actually, one of my copies came all the way from England, from a library in England, that they were getting rid of it because it wasn't being published anymore. But in later publications, it was just called Alfred Adler. And but the first one, the very first, and then she, did some editing like in 1962. The first one was written like, I think 1939.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
Yeah. So, so understanding the root of a person, understanding their whole, and of course, nobody can totally understand. When I'm talking about holism, even with our children, there's always that one part of us that's a question mark.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's more to learn, there's more to discover. But most of us, like I've said before, feel more comfortable when we can label, and then we box a child into a certain way. Well, they're lazy, for example. And I believe that labels prevent us from going deeper to see the whole.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, of course, we need to use labels, like this is salt. I mean, that's helpful, right? But at the same time, there's salt, SALT, is also unique. There are many kinds of salt. There's pink Himalayan salt. There's Celtic salt. There's salt from this place and that place. I mean, yes, the overall term might be salt, but then also unique flavors of salt. There's salt with iodine, there's salt without iodine. I mean, we could go on, but the point is that yes, we use labels. They simplify communication, but they also, because there's a polarity.
Yes.
Okay, labels themselves aren't bad, but it's how we use them. If we use them to limit how we see the whole, then they're hurtful. But if we realize, okay, I'm using this label because it simplifies, such as, okay, this is salt. And even if it's Himalayan salt, pink salt, because there's pink salt out there. Okay, even though there's different kinds of salt, we can all accept that this is salt. Okay, that's when a label can be helpful. All right. But if we limit it to there's only one kind of salt, then it becomes hurtful. And it's the same thing. I may see a child's behavior and I may label it lazy, but in reality, how do I know that? Just like your child said that. How do I know this is laziness? That's my term. That's my label. Who has decided that this child's behavior is lazy? Well, in this case, me, but what else could it be? Maybe they're tired. Maybe they don't feel good. Maybe they're needing to be quiet and integrate something that's going on. Or maybe they're afraid. We might say, oh, they're procrastinating. Well, maybe they're afraid because they don't know how to do something and they're avoiding it. Which one of us hasn't done that as adults? So again, for us to step back and consider the whole, and that there are many possibilities. And when we label, we can miss the whole. Does that make any sense? I hope I'm being clear.
For me, it really does. And there's so much that comes when you speak, and so I think you just explained so beautifully that concept of separation consciousness, how this is all about how can we come back together and connect with our child and to acknowledge when we are separated, right?
That's it. Labels separate us. They separate us from our connection. They separate us from ourselves.
Yeah.
They separate us from each other. They separate us from being part and realizing we are part of the whole of the ecology.
Agree.
Okay. And they do this
Yeah.
or this. We can either put ourselves here or here. But what I discovered is I was really good at putting myself here because I was so afraid of not being perfect and failing that I chose to be here, which was just as arrogant as choosing to be here.
And why can I know what's behind it, but for somebody who might ask a question, why would you also be arrogant when you put yourself there?
Put yourself down because I am judging myself as being less than, and anyone, whether it's another person judging me or myself judging me, that is still arrogance. Now that is a choice, but it doesn't mean that's the whole of the person. In other words, we can call in English we have an idiom, call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
In other words, you don't call a spade anything else than a spade,
Yeah.
right? And so it is good to, term something that's arrogance, but to not to judge the other person
Yeah.
for their arrogance. Does that make any sense?
For me, it makes total sense. And we're going to come on to something that we call private logic in a moment. And what I discovered when I find myself here, like you explained, for me, it usually comes from a point of how I see the world and how I think it should be and where I should be in my development. And then, that as they're doing it all wrong and therefore I'll put myself here. So that's how I justify that.
Exactly.
I find myself arrogant because I have so much advice for the other, how they should be different so that we could be like this. Do you know what I mean?
Right. But I mean, it's also, I'm judging others as being better than me. And that is a form of reverse arrogance.
Absolutely. I'm with you.
That's what I'm saying when I say that. If there's arrogance here and there's arrogance here.
I agree.
And again, it comes, as you just said. So our private logic. So Adler, of course, one of the terms, he didn't call it private logic. Rudolf Dreikurs called it private logic.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Private intelligence, your private way of being intelligent in the world that everybody needs. We come forth, we have to create some kind of structure in order to have relationship with other people and the world. Okay. And so we base that on our unconscious choices, unconscious beliefs, unconscious decisions that we make in reference to our experiences with our family system, or the community, the school system. All of those systems influence us, and then we respond. Again, here's the holistic approach. We respond with our way of seeing it. And this is why so many families can have the same children. I have a dear friend who had a number of children, and all her children just love her and adore her, except this one who thinks she was the worst mother in the world. And so he has beliefs and memories that he interpreted, and he is just so sure that this was the truth. Whereas the others in the family saw it very differently. So again, this comes back to unconscious choice when we're very small. And then when we become adults, the reason Adler was called Apostle of Freedom is his whole psychology was about drawing forth that private intelligence, private logic of how we see the world, not only the world, but others and ourselves in it, and help us come forth to the truth rather than our limited way of seeing it. Is that, I hope I'm being clear to all your listeners.
But it is absolutely clear to me too. And that's why also I don't know if Jane Nelson, the founder of Positive Discipline, brought that up, that what it educate, how it comes from educare. I always love to.
Oh, Educari, right,
Yeah.
right, right. Actually, she got that from Steve Glenn.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
I was first introduced to it through Steve Glenn, and then Jane, then of course, obviously they worked together. She used to travel with Steve, and Steve did not write because he was dyslexic.
Okay.
So Jane would take all his stories, and if you've ever heard him speak, he could just go on and on and on. And she would tape them, and this is back in the 1980s.
Okay.
She would tape them on a little tape recorder, and then she would transcribe it. And that's how his book was written.
Wow. I can't believe that you know all this. This is just so valuable.
I started at the almost to the beginning, because Jane and Lynn Lott, who of course done teaching parenting, the positive discipline way, and positive discipline in the classroom, and so forth and so on, they put out their first teaching parenting in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
So I was so Jane at the time was working with Steve, and he would promote her book through his classes. And then, of course, she met Lynn, and then they came together, and Lynn had all these experiential activities. Plus, she and Jane were taking courses in these experiential activities and other places. And so they put it together, and that was how the first teaching parenting came about.
Wow.
So that was the kind of the progression. So in educare, right, it means to draw forth, not to put in, right? Exactly. And of course that's very Adlerian, because again, Adler is about asking questions, discovering what is, how do you see the world? How do you see yourself? How do you see others? Because then that impacts how you move in the world.
Absolutely.
It's your private map, if you will, of how you are in the world. And I can't tell you how amazing it is when you discover a private way of seeing the world, a private map, and you realize, oh my God, this isn't the truth.
Yes, I agree.
And it dissolves, and you see it's so free.
Mm-hmm.
It is so free. And that was Adler's big goal, was to help people become free and step into the intelligence. He called it a common intelligence or common sense. But what he meant by that was the common truths that you and I have been talking about, that all people need to want to belong and to be significant. That's a common truth, no matter where you are on the planet, right? So that's a universal truth of human beings anyway, right? So, and the dignity that all people, want to be treated with dignity and respect, and then the importance of respect for self, respect for others, and respect for the needs of the situation. Those are common sense, common truths. And when you move into that, then you are going to be meeting, even in difficult situations, you're going to be meeting people here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I hope this is clear.
Oh, yeah, it makes so much sense. And it explains how, the way we always see parenting styles in the traditional way, they're at the end of those spectrums of very kind of about the parent or about the child, and this is just so beautiful how this is pendulum. So what's the word in English?
Pendulum swings, yes.
Where it goes in the middle, balances out. I thought there was a word, but I forgot now.
Absolutely. And, talking about private logic or private intelligence, a mother once was telling her son, who was 8 at the time, that he had a half brother, and he starts to cry. And he sobs, and she was wise enough to ask the question, and not assume, oh my God, he's going to think he's not getting enough love if he has a half brother, So instead of thinking what she thought it was, she asked the question. Turns out that he thought that meant his brother was cut in half.
Oh,
And his little sensitive heart didn't want anybody to suffer.
yeah. Oh,
So often we think we know what the child is thinking.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
we project our own thoughts on the child, and we limit them, who that child is, in our own consciousness. So it's not seeing that wholeness, or even stepping beyond our own arrogance and saying, I wonder what this means to this child.
Yeah.
And, it's just like one time I was working with a kindergartner that the teacher was ready to quit over. This child was extremely challenging in her classroom. So she asked me to come in and observe and consult. So I did. And we'll call this little boy David. And I don't even remember what he did in the classroom, but he did something that was, not appropriate according to the class guidelines. And so I got down on my knees with him and I said, David, what do you need to do now? And he said, behave. And I said, and David, what does behave mean to you? He froze. He didn't have a clue as to what behave meant. He just knew that that's what adults told him he should do.
Yeah.
But he didn't understand what behave meant. He had no clue whatsoever, because no one had taken the time to teach him what they expected from the word behave.
Wow.
So again, I encourage anyone who's listening to this, I know you do this all the time, Annette, with the groups that you work with, and ask questions. Don't assume that you know why your child is doing something. Don't get so bent out of shape, especially if you have a value of saying not lying. Say your value is not to lie, and your child lies. Okay, are you willing to go beyond your own personal value and discover what caused my child to lie? Could they be afraid of what will happen to them? What do I need to do to help them realize that lying isn't dangerous? Adler had a wonderful quote. The truth would not, the truth, what is it? Lying would not be necessary if the truth was not seen as dangerous.
Powerful quote.
So again, this is about our going beyond our own personal private logic, considering that our child is seeing it differently. In this case, we're talking about children, but this can happen too with couples, partnerships. They each see, let's say, money is a big thing. They each see money. They bring their private logic, their private intelligence on money from their childhood experiences with their mother and their dad, or their family system. And then they each bring it. And rarely do couples sit down before they get married and say, how do you see money? How do you see budgeting? We bring our best selves when we're dating.
Yeah.
And then we find out, oh, there's other parts of the whole that we didn't show. And that are being influenced by our ancestors and the culture that, that we've come from, whether it's the family culture or the culture of the country, or whatever culture it happens to be, because there's many different kinds of culture.
Yeah.
So that's how understanding that each one of us has a unique way of seeing ourselves, others, and the world, and making decisions based on that, to step back from that and consider what else could be here. And this is where being a good detective can come in handy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that, do you think we've covered private logic enough?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to add something, and I probably need to, otherwise it wouldn't have come up this morning, you know. I was driving my children into summer camp, and I don't know how they started it. I wish I could sometimes write everything down that they share, but I was reminded of something that you shared, you know, when I was young. My brother was probably 2 and I was 7. And I think you say that in the English language as well, that things are so cute you could eat them up. You know, I think my children said that about something. You could eat them up. And me as a 7-year-old, I was picturing how my mother would open, you know, the door to the oven and push him in. And I was a bit worried at the time, you know. So,
Yeah.
but then also, right, as a child, you don't really have that courage to sometimes ask, does that actually mean it? Because of the stage of development where we're at, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And this, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
And then why I find this so powerful, and I'd love if in a minute you could share how parents could maybe work with you, or I'm going to also link the Positive Discipline Association if anybody's interested in becoming maybe a parent educator, because I learned so much going deeper. You know, there's constantly trainings, or for teachers who hear that, but maybe in closing with the private logic, which I'm only finding more out about now. And I've shared this with you. I would have found, I read Children the Challenge, as I always say, and there's a chapter called Mind Your Own Business. And I didn't know how to do this. So I Googled it and I found Byron Katie's The Work, which I can link here in this clip as well. And that was my way of finding these questions to question my private logic. And what was so profound for me, I think it goes with the Adlerian approach, is that what we learn, these beliefs in the early years that we then don't question. And I sometimes would still have these fear-based beliefs as an adult that I formed as that young child, right? So that's how private logic is just mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah. This is why it's so important to begin to discover it. And once we do, then we have the choice consciously to say, hey, I'm not going to hook myself to that wagon of belief anymore. You know, I'm going to decouple myself. However, okay, the younger the experience when we formed that belief, it will be more challenging. Not impossible, but more challenging. You really have to stay conscious. Oh, there it is again, you know, and not get upset with yourself. You know, there it is again, and it'll get quicker. You'll get quicker at noticing it and not getting recoupled again. And pretty soon it will be like a resource book on your library. And there'll be no more painful attachment to it at all. It'll just be, oh, yes, I've learned this, the wisdom earned and learned. Yeah, and what Byron Katie does is exactly the kinds of questions we ask when we're an Adlerian psychotherapist, which I am now. And that is those kinds of questions to help a person explore their private logic, how they see the world. A lot of times we're so focused on our response to what somebody did to us, and we take it personally, instead of the work, as Byron Katie calls it, or Adlerian Psychology simply calls it exploring your private logic, is it takes you up high to see the whole picture. Now we're back to holism again. And understanding, oh, I'm taking personally what this person said, and they had a stomachache that day, for example, you know, and we judge it versus discernment. You know, isn't this interesting? I feel less than because of what that person just said. Isn't that interesting? And then we work with ourselves. And it is possible that that person wanted us to feel less than. Okay, that's also a possibility. But if we allow it, what we forget is we have the power of choice.
We do.
I don't have to give my power away. Remember, I said those 3 beliefs: I am capable, I matter, I am here to contribute, and I have the power of choice, I have influence. Okay, if we allow someone to take away our enoughness, okay, then we are contributing to the situation. But if I'll say, that's where that person is, and I know that isn't true for me. It may be true for them, and that's their business. Back to minding our own business, but it's not true for me. You know, and this is hard with parents because we are judged often in many cultures by the way our children act. And so it's really hard not to be embarrassed when our children act out, and stay focused on, what do I need to contribute? What do I need to do to take care of myself first? Then what do I need to take care of the needs of the situation? And ignore as much as possible their judgment, because this child was given to me.
Absolutely.
Grace. Yeah, but that's not easy.
Absolutely.
That's not easy. So would you like to close with the picture, understanding the whole child concept? Would you like to close with that? So this is one thing that I show parents and teachers of how to understand the whole child, with the remembrance that there's always a question mark of things that we may not know ever. So to consider the mystery.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay, so here we go. Here is our child. There are 2 environments that all human beings are part of when they're born into the world. The one is the inner environment. The other is the outer environment. The other is the outer environment. The inner environment consists of heredity. That's our DNA. This is what determines, our eye color, our hair color, whether we're predisposed to certain illnesses. It doesn't mean we have to get those illnesses. We just have more of a natural predisposition to get them. Again, it's not set in stone. It's only a possibility, but that is part of the heredity piece. The other part is generational trauma. So I have a dear friend, Ines, who was born in East Germany. And she told me some of her growing up experiences produced and her generational trauma, because there was a lot of poverty where she grew up and experienced, not a lot of food, limited resources, not a lot of what do I want to say, limited resources, but not exposure to anything out of the very limited place where they were in East Germany. And then it went back to the rest of her family system, experiencing trauma during World War II, World War I. All of that is part of a child's inner environment. So, for instance, in my country, we had something in the 1940s, in the 1930s, called the Great Depression, where a lot of people starved to death or had very limited means. People went hungry, they were out of work. And so children of that generation often then hoarded things. They thought, oh, got to have more sugar. I'm going to hoard this sugar because we didn't have sugar. So all of that is part of generational trauma. I worked a lot in China, and when Mao Zedong started to be afraid of losing power, and he had that the culture wars, culture wars in China. And so I've worked with some of the adults who've come out and some of the children who have come out of that, and they still have some generational trauma from going through that, from the fear.
Yeah.
And the lack of resources during that time. So that's an important piece to be aware of in your own family system. But if you work with families, it's also an important thing to be aware of, whether the adults you work with or the children you work with, that this is all part of the whole. Then there's the mother's nutrition at the time, the inner environment. Okay, and that would be physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Then if there were any birth challenges, illnesses, or accidents, all of that impacts the inner environment of the child. So the mother's nutrition. The other part that I'm going to add to this is the father's input, because the energy of the father impacts the fetus growing in the womb as much as the mother does. The environment between the mother and the father, okay, and the child is within the womb, is picking up when the parents are arguing. And that, of course, is the mother's nutrition. Is she feeling safe? Is she anxious? Then birth challenges, such as if a child was a breech birth, or if the child had an accident, like for example, the physician used forceps to pull the child out of the womb. Okay, and there was an accident on the brain or the head. And then illnesses or lack of air, lack of oxygen. So a child's born with cerebral palsy, for example, or back in the 1960s, we had mothers who had taken thalidomide to help with their morning sickness. Yes,
like that in Germany too, I think.
Yeah. And of course, the thalidomide produced deformities. So all of that impacts the child's inner environment and how they are experiencing life. Remember, this is all about relationships. So in the inner environment, the child is experiencing the inner environment and how they can relate to it. Right. Okay, the outer environment then would be your family atmosphere. Is the child born into a family that is cooperative, or is there a lot of bitterness and arguments? Okay, all of that is impacting the child in relationship, how they see the world, how they see themselves, how they see others, how they determine what are mothers, what are fathers, what man, woman. And then the birth order relationships. This is in relationships to their siblings. Am I an only child and I'm relating to my parents? Is one of my parents more a sibling than a parent to me? Or in your case, you thought when your mom wanted to eat up your little brother, your experience is you cared about him enough that you didn't want him put in the oven.
Yeah.
Okay. But all of this goes in, and now you were 5 years older than your brother, so you were more an only child when your brother came along. Okay, so you were very mothery to him, or at least in that sense, you wanted to protect him.
Yeah.
You weren't in a competitive situation where you said, "Oh, I hope she does put him in the oven because then I'll be rid of him." You weren't there at all, because there wasn't as much of a closeness in your age. Yeah. So you were further removed from your brother and more in a caregiving towards him, at least protective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I probably would have been told, be careful. So that definitely, right?
Yes.
You have to be careful with this little one. And yeah.
Exactly. So birth order relationships, we learn how to work with others in a family system. And so that is why birth order can be so important. And then the nutrition in the outer environment. What kind of nutrition are you getting? Physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. What kind of nutrition is the child getting? And the spiritual isn't necessarily going to church or synagogue or a mosque, but it is more about, are you getting out into the environment? Are you having connection with that which is greater than yourself, such as nature?
Yeah.
Okay. All of that is part of the outer environment, and understanding that helps you understand the whole of the child.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of times teachers, I emphasize, if a child isn't having good physical nutrition or a good emotional nutrition, if they're coming from a trauma in their home, then they are going to have difficulty paying attention in class. So again, understanding the whole of the child isn't necessarily misbehaving.
Yeah.
If they're hungry or they're tired. And then what outer environment is the culture? What kind of lessons are they learning in their culture about food, about dress, about mores, value systems? What value systems does your culture have? You know, Ines was telling me that in growing up in East Germany, there was not safety. And so a value was to keep safe. And she could not understand. She was in a, what is it called? Nonviolent communication training. And they were telling the story of this man who, during World War I, there was still fighting going on, but there was a slight lull. And this man really was hoping that they were going to be able to capture these German soldiers without firing a shot. And so he decided to play, I think it was a violin. It was some instrument. And he played this beautiful music, and everybody was thinking this was so great because he was really emphasizing peace and coming together here. And Ines said her experience was, in her belief system was he crazy? He was going to be shot, because she had grown up in an environment where if you put yourself out there in a risk, you would be killed.
Yeah.
So she had trouble seeing it as a peaceful way of doing it, because to her, it didn't make sense. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. I always think we project our truth onto someone else then, right? Or private logic, or
private logic, right? Exactly, on someone else. And then environmental factors. So in my country, we're having difficulty with clean water. So if a child is drinking water that is unhealthy, that's going to impact their behavior.
Yeah.
Right. Environmental factors, the air quality. If a child has asthma and there's a lot of smoke in the air, okay, they're going to be coughing. They're not going to want to pay attention because they're not in a classroom, for example, because they're not feeling good.
Yeah.
So environmental factors, the pollution, all of that is part of the outer environment of the whole child.
Yeah.
And then the last part is the part that parents have no control over. Sorry. Let's get out of here. Whoops. There it is. And that is the child's experiences. The parent, of course, can, produce some experiences, like you're taking your children to summer camp, for example. So you're providing those experiences. But a child just has plain experiences. That's how we learn. We attach language to experiences. We attach beliefs to experiences. Okay, this is a part where the child is in charge unconsciously. So out of the child's experiences, whether through the 5 senses or their neuroperceptive experiences, how they are balancing their spatial relationships in the world, they take all of that and then make an interpretation of what that experience means to who they are. I am, others are, and then life is. And that's where the beliefs are formed, which leads to the decisions of how to move in the world. What kind of choices am I going to make? What kind of goals am I going to form? And then what kind of strategies I'm going to form based on those goals to accomplish what I want to accomplish in those goals. And all of this is unconscious.
Wow.
All of this is and more, because I'm going to add question mark, and more, because there's more that I may not be aware of that also enters into understanding the whole child.
Wow. That was so interesting.
Well, it's something that I got from Rudolf Dreikers. I've just expanded it based on what we know about trauma-informed approaches. Because Dreikers, of course, that was not part of the energy, the zeitgeist of the time when he was writing his book, Children the Challenge.
Yeah.
But he did talk about all of these things as far as inner and outer environment. And then the child, the part that the parent really has no control over, is the child's interpretations and the beliefs that they form based on their experiences. And it's all unconscious. And this is why, as you know, why in positive discipline, we encourage parents to have curiosity.
Exactly. And then when we get access to the belief, then we can do something about it, right? That's the revolutionary bit that I love so much.
Exactly. Like, for instance, I was working with a parent the other day, and her little girl has started to be very anxious, to the point where she's throwing up at night. She has insomnia. And so, of course, the parents are doing all they know to do, but they're very puzzled. And the little girl was, was being told, well, your teacher will understand if you're tired in class because you're not sleeping well. And she said, no, I can't. My teacher's going to think I'm not a good girl. And so I suggested to the mother, I said, why don't you ask her what a good girl means to her?
Oh, wow.
And because then you're going to discover, what are these fears?
Yeah.
Does she have a perfectionistic? Because in the past, when she was younger, everybody say, oh, you're so beautiful, you're so smart, you're so this, you're so that. Well, now in second grade, the academics is getting harder. And she's not she knows I'm not as smart, but she thinks she has to stay here to be perfect, to be the best, because that's what, she gets her sense of self-worth. So find out, begin to explore, what is being a good girl to you? Because again, these are our labels, and we don't go deeper to discover, what does that really mean? Who decides?
Yeah.
What is
the definition of a good girl?
Exactly. Well, it has been such an honor to share with you today.
Thank you so much. So can are you taking on clients, or is there a way, if somebody was interested, to work with you?
Oh, I would be so honored if that works for people. And yes, there is. The best thing for people to do is just contact me via my email address, which you have.
Yes.
And if they're interested, and then we can set up a time to discuss what their needs are and go from there.
Brilliant. I'll do that. And you are based in Colorado, so it's heading to lunchtime now, or even beyond it. And we're going off to bed here in Ireland.
I work with people in different countries, and so I have to stop and think, Let's see. Oh, it is 10 after 2 my time, but
Oh.
I'll forget because I'm working like I was checking on your time
Mhm.
in Ireland, and I work with people late at night and also early in the morning, depending on their needs.
Brilliant. Wow. Thank you so much, Deborah. It was an absolute pleasure. And
Oh, same.
I would love to hear from parents who watch this, if they have maybe questions that we could explore some of the topics further, and how this has helped. So please leave your comments below. And I really appreciate your time. And thank you very much for coming on my channel.
Thank you for asking. I appreciate that.
Thank you.